The actor is a really brilliant Golden Girls episode. This is the 14th episode of the second season. It's directed by Terry Hughes, and as always, there will be spoilers from now as I go through things chronologically and share some thoughts along the way. And it starts off kind of randomly with a nice way to include Sophia in this, but I kind of wish Sophia had been part of the main narrative. It could have been quite interesting, but nevertheless, what we get from Sophia is pretty cool. She walks into the house with a sabre under her coat, and it turns out she has a job at Captain Jack's seafood shanty. And we very briefly, I think on 2 occasions in 2 scenes, see her in the costume for the restaurant, and she's basically dressed like a pirate, and I think she looks absolutely awesome. The rest of the episode is about Rose, Dorothy, and Blanche, and I really like it when we have narratives that focus on at least 3 of them together. I don't mind the episodes when they all have separate narratives, but when they're all kind of working towards the same story, I think in general those are more so my favourite ones. And they're very excited because they found out that they have a television actor called Patrick Vaughn who's going to be starring in their community theatre's production. And of course they're all going to audition for this. They're all really happy about this. Rose says that he melts her Haagen-Dazs, which I love. I think that's absolutely adorable. We're then down at the community centre, and in walks Patrick Vaughn. He's played by Lloyd Bochner. And the girls are really closing in on his personal space. They're all fighting over him, and they're all wanting to be his leading lady. So we see Dorothy performing, and then Blanche performing, and we have this fantastic quote from Patrick Vaughn where he says, "I'm afraid I popped your bosom." Blanche was very obviously wearing something inside her bra, or maybe outside of it, I don't know, but clearly they were inflatable, and when she hugged him as part of the reading of the scene, they obviously deflated with an incredible sound effect, and his response was very, very funny. And it turns out, and there are quite a few surprising things in this, and the biggest surprise for me is that none of them got the part. I had guessed incorrectly that one of them would get the part, and then there'd be tensions, maybe they'd fall sick and somebody would have to understudy. I don't know, that's just kind of what I'd predicted based on nothing, really. So I was really surprised when none of them got the main part. And then things take a more interesting turn because Blanche is alone with him very briefly. And he asks Blanche out to dinner. Fair enough. Nothing unusual about that. And then Rose is alone with him as she goes looking for Blanche. And she's adorable. He says to her, "Rose, there's something I've been wanting to ask you all day." And without missing a beat, Rose replies, "Mine are real," which I thought was very cute. And he asks Rose out, and then he sees Dorothy, and he asks Dorothy out. And I can't remember the exact timing, but I think he's meeting Blanche for dinner at 8, Rose for dinner at 10, and then he's meeting Dorothy at midnight, if I remember. I'll be honest, if somebody asked me out on a date at midnight, I'd be a little suspicious. I might not immediately think, oh, it's because they're seeing somebody before me, but I would find that a little bit peculiar. And something I hadn't worked out, or I guess something I hadn't realised, is that he doesn't know they live together. I had just assumed it would have come up in conversation. So when Blanche takes him back to her house after their dinner or wherever they've been, he is surprised when Dorothy walks in. And it kind of took me a second to realise that he doesn't know they live together and that he hadn't expected to see her there. And then Rose walks in. And I was so surprised as well. I completely just got everything wrong with predicting this episode. I thought that's when the jig would be up. But it isn't. He managed to get away with it by faking some story about a contact lens and throwing Blanche's play character, and it was a very bizarre scene and a very strong, if slightly awkward, performance from the character of Patrick Vaughn. We then go to the evening of the play of the opening night, and Rose wants to give him a rose, so Blanche says she'll give him the rose for her, and then along comes Phyllis, a character played by Carroll, and she reveals that she had been together with Patrick all week. And, of course, Blanche and Rose realised that he'd been, well, I guess, seeing both of them, they haven't yet realised that they both saw him. But then the penny drops and they realise that he'd been seeing at least 3 of them. And they end up discussing it on stage. And then Dorothy joins in the conversation. She's dressed as the sheriff because she had to fill the role last minute. And honestly, I think she looks wonderful. In fact, I love all of the costumes. I love the set design. I love the staging. I wasn't expecting to actually see any of the production. So I thought that was really, really delightful. And they end up confronting him on stage about the fact he'd been seeing all of them. And then it seems like he's been dating, if we can use the word dating, all of the women on that stage. And it got very awkward. And he did point out at one point, well, you all had a good time, didn't you? Which, for a very brief second, I kind of thought, fair enough, people had a good time. But they still could have had a good time, even if they'd known about the other people. And then they could have made the decision, well, do I still want to go out with him? Am I not comfortable with that? They should have been given that choice, and they weren't. And I think that's the biggest issue. I think, let's face it, most people would be willing to go on a dinner date with their favourite TV star, even if that TV star was having dinner dates with the rest of the cast as well. But they weren't given the option to make that decision for themselves, which I think is the biggest issue. And he ends up getting kicked off of the stage, not physically, but they basically tell him to go away. And there's this moment where the cast kind of forgot that they were on stage because the audience starts to applaud them. And it's not clear to me whether the audience thought that was part of the production. It was a very dramatic scene. It may well have been part of the production as far as the audience can see, or if the audience were applauding because all of these women stood up to this horrible individual. I don't know which way I feel, and I don't know which one I'd rather. If they thought it was part of the production, that's pretty funny. If they're applauding these women standing up for themselves, that's pretty great. If anybody has any strong opinions, or even if you know for a fact which one it was, please feel free to let me know. But either way, I really liked it. But I also like the fact that they're holding hands and Dorothy basically has to fling Rose down to get her into a bow because she's just completely shocked by the view of the audience. And then Dorothy calls Rose a titmouse, which is not an insult I've ever heard, I don't think. They might have used it in the show before, I can't remember. But I love that. I absolutely want to call somebody a titmouse the next time they're not irritating me. She called her that because when they got home, they were talking about how they were humiliated by what Patrick Vaughn had done, and Rose was not clued into the conversation as much as she perhaps could have been. And it's a nice way to end things as they're just talking about the events, and it's a really pleasant way to wrap things up. And I think we could have had more of Sophia. We definitely could have had more of Sophia in this episode. What we got was good, but I think it would have been even more entertaining if she'd been part of the story. Not even if she'd been dating Patrick Vaughn. She didn't need to have been one of his women, if you like, but I feel like she still could have been part of the production. They could have found a really comedic role for Sophia to play in the production, and I would have really liked to have seen that. But nevertheless, what we got of her was really great, and I think this is a really funny episode, but with some really important messages as well about how you shouldn't treat people, and some fabulous quotes as well. The actor is definitely a really brilliant episode of The Golden Girls.